Scary telling.
There's a girl standing outside my window. The only problem is I live on the 7th floor. I first noticed her last night when I got up to use the bathroom. It was around 3 a.m. and I was feeling a little groggy. I stumbled to the bathroom, did my business, and then made my way back to bed. As I was settling in, I caught a glimpse of something moving outside. I sat up and looked closer. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the fire escape, looking up at me. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was still half asleep, but when I looked again, she was still there. I felt a chill run down my spine. The girl was young, maybe in her early 20s, and she was wearing a tattered dress that looked like it had been pulled from the garbage. Her hair was a mess, and her skin was as pale as a ghost. I couldn't make out her face in the dark, but I could feel her eyes on me. I got up and walked closer to the window, trying to get a better look. That's when she spoke. "Let me in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I jumped back, my heart pounding in my chest. How did she know I was there? Was she talking to me? I didn't know what to do, so I just backed away from the window and went back to bed. It took me hours to fall back asleep. The next day, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a dream or a trick of the light. But when I came home from work that evening, there she was again, standing outside my window. I froze in the doorway, staring at the girl on the fire escape. She looked just like she had the night before, but this time, she was holding something in her hand. It was a piece of paper, and as I watched, she held it up to the window. I couldn't see what was on the paper from where I was standing, so I cautiously walked towards the window, my heart racing. When I got close enough to see the paper, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my apartment. How did she get this? I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized the gravity of the situation. Someone had been watching me, and they were now outside my window, threatening me with their presence. I backed away from the window and sat on my bed, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't call the police. What would I tell them? There was a girl outside my window on the 7th floor, holding a picture of me. I decided to try and confront her. I walked back to the window and opened it, leaning out to get a better look. The girl didn't move, but I could see her more clearly now. Her eyes were black as coal, and her face was twisted into a grotesque grin. "What do you want?" I shouted at her. "Let me in," she repeated, holding out the picture of me. I shook my head. "No way. Who are you? How did you get that picture?" The girl didn't answer. She just kept staring at me, her eyes boring into mine. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to step back from the window to catch my breath. When I looked out again, the girl was gone. I closed the window and locked it, feeling more scared and alone than ever before. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew that I was in danger. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I came home from work, I would check the fire escape, but there was never anyone there. I started to think that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, that maybe I was losing my mind. But then, on the 4th night, I heard a tapping at my window. It was soft at first, barely audible over the sounds of the city, but it quickly grew louder and more insistent. I approached the window slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got close enough, I saw her again, the girl from the fire escape, tapping on the glass with her long, bony fingers. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I choked it back. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, didn't want anyone else to see her. I tried to ignore her, to pretend that she wasn't there, but the tapping continued, getting louder and more insistent by the second. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to face her and spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" The girl just smiled at me, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Let me in," she said. I shook my head. "No. I don't know who you are or what you want, but you can't come in here." The girl's smile faltered, and for a moment I thought she might leave. But then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. She held it up to the window, jangling it back and forth. "Let me in," she said again. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. How did she get a key to my apartment? Who was she? And what did she want from me? I backed away from the window and ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night, and when I woke up in the morning, I knew that I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get out, had to find somewhere safe. I packed a bag and left the apartment, feeling like a fugitive. As I walked down the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, following me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Just an empty stairwell, stretching up into the darkness. I made it out of the building and into the street, but I knew that I wasn't safe yet. The girl from the fire escape was still out there, somewhere, and she was still watching me. I wandered the streets aimlessly, unsure of where to go or what to do. I couldn't go back to my apartment, not with that girl there. But I had nowhere else to go. As I walked, I started to notice something strange. Everywhere I went, people were staring at me. It wasn't just a passing glance either, they were watching me intently, their eyes following me as I passed by. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but it was too real. Everywhere I looked, someone was staring at me. It was like they knew something I didn't, like they were all in on some secret that I wasn't privy to. I started to feel paranoid, like everyone was out to get me. I knew it wasn't true, but I couldn't help the feeling. I was being followed, watched, hunted. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was empty except for the barista, a kind-looking woman with a warm smile. I ordered a coffee and sat down at one of the small tables, trying to calm my nerves. The barista seemed to sense my unease and sat down across from me. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether or not to trust her. But something about her kind face put me at ease, and I found myself spilling the whole story about the girl on the fire escape, about the key, about the feeling of being followed. The barista listened intently, her expression growing more and more concerned as I spoke. "That's terrible," she said when I finished. "You need to go to the police, tell them everything." I shook my head. "I don't think they'll believe me. It all sounds so crazy." The barista leaned forward, her eyes burning into mine. "You have to try," she said. "This is your life we're talking about. You can't just run away from it." I knew she was right. I couldn't keep running forever. So, with a deep breath, I stood up and headed for the door, ready to face whatever came next. As I stepped outside, I saw her again, the girl from the fire escape. She was standing on the opposite side of the street, watching me with those black eyes. But this time, she wasn't alone. There were others with her, a whole group of people, all staring at me with the same intensity. I froze in place, unsure of what to do. But then, I remembered the barista's words. I had to try. So, With a newfound sense of determination, I turned and started walking towards the police station, ready to tell my story and face whatever came next. The police station was crowded, and I had to wait in a long line before I could talk to someone. My anxiety grew with each passing moment, and I could feel the eyes of the people around me boring into my back. Finally, it was my turn to speak with an officer. I stumbled over my words, trying to explain everything that had happened, but the officer just looked at me skeptically. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You found a key, used it to enter an apartment, and saw a girl on the fire escape who shouldn't have been there. And now you think someone's following you?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, sir. And I think they're dangerous. I don't know what they want, but I'm scared for my life." The officer sighed, shaking his head. "Look, kid, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but we don't have time for this. There are real crimes happening out there, and we can't waste our resources on some wild goose chase." I felt my heart sink as he turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing. I was on my own, with no one to turn to and nowhere to go. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There was a woman standing across the street, watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She was wearing all black, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes were fixed on me like she knew something I didn't. I tried to ignore her, to walk away and forget about the whole thing, but I couldn't. I knew that she was part of whatever was happening to me, and I had to confront her. So, with a deep breath, I crossed the street and approached her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you know anything about what's happening to me? The girl on the fire escape, the key, everything?" The woman looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold and distant. I could feel my frustration boiling over. "Don't lie to me," I said. "I know you're involved somehow. You and the girl on the fire escape and all those people following me around." The woman's eyes narrowed, and I could feel the tension in the air. But before she could say anything else, a hand landed on my shoulder. "Sir, is everything okay here?" a voice asked. I turned to see another police officer, his expression stern. "This woman isn't bothering you, is she?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But then, I remembered the barista's words. I had to try. "No, she's not bothering me," I said. "But she knows something about what's happening to me. Please, officer, you have to help me." The officer looked at me skeptically, but then he turned to the woman. "Ma'am, do you have any information about this man's claims?" The woman just shook her head, her eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know anything," she said. "But if he's in danger, you need to help him." The officer looked back at me, his expression softening slightly. "All right, son. Come with me, and we'll see what we can do." As I followed him back into the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. But I knew that I had to keep going to find out what was happening and why. My life depended on it. The officers took down my statement and promised to investigate, but I could tell that they didn't believe me. They wrote me off as another crazy person, someone who was imagining things that weren't there. But I knew that I wasn't crazy. I had seen the girl on the fire escape, felt the key in my hand, and experienced the fear of being followed by people who seemed to want to hurt me. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. I had no one to turn to, no one who would listen to me. I was on my own in this strange, dangerous world. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind was racing with questions and fears. Who was following me, and why? What did they want? And most importantly, how was I going to stay safe? I tossed and turned, unable to find any peace. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard a noise outside my window. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, a soft tapping on the glass. I sat up, my heart racing. I knew that I shouldn't look, that I should stay in bed and pretend like nothing was happening. But I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I turned my head to look at the window. And there, staring back at me, was the girl from the fire escape. She was standing on thin air, her body suspended outside my 7th floor window as if by magic. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide and unblinking. And then, without warning, she began to speak. "Let me in," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "Let me in, and I'll tell you everything you need to know." I knew that I shouldn't listen to her, that I should scream for help and run as fast as I could. But something in her voice, in the desperation of her words, made me pause. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked down, but there was nothing there, no fire escape, no ledge, nothing but a sheer drop to the ground below. And then, as if by magic, the girl was inside my room, standing just a few feet away from me. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, but she didn't move. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. The girl just smiled, a twisted, sickening smile that made my skin crawl. "I'm the one who's been watching you," she said. "The one who's been following you. And now, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as she spoke, her words filling me with a sense of dread and terror. I knew that whatever she was about to say would change everything, that it would alter the course of my life forever. And then, with a single, chilling sentence, she did. "You're not who you think you are," she said. "You're something much, much worse." I stared at the girl in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she had just said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The girl just laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that filled the room. "You're not human," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "You're something much older, much darker. And they're coming for you." "Who's coming for me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The others," she said. "The ones like you. The ones who know what you are and what you can do." I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead as she spoke. I didn't know what to believe, but there was something in her words that rang true, something that spoke to a deep, primal fear inside of me. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The girl just smiled, a twisted, sickening grin that made my skin crawl. "You run," she said. "You run as fast as you can, and you never stop. Because if they catch you, they'll destroy you." I nodded, my mind racing with questions and fears. I didn't know what to believe, but there was something in her words that felt true, something that spoke to a deep, primal fear inside of me. And then, without warning, the girl was gone, disappearing into thin air as if she had never been there. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before stumbling over to the window and looking outside. But there was nothing there, nothing but the empty streets and the distant glow of the city. I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with questions and fears. Who was I, really? And why were they after me? I didn't know the answers, but I knew that I had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of whoever was chasing me. And so, the next morning, I packed a bag and left my apartment, taking to the streets and running as fast as I could. I didn't know where I was going or what I was looking for, but I knew that I had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of whoever was chasing me. And so, for weeks, I wandered the city, sleeping in abandoned buildings and hiding in the shadows. I was constantly on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, but I never saw anyone following me. But then, one night, as I was sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, I heard a noise outside. I woke up, my heart racing, and looked outside. And there, staring back at me through the darkness, were three figures, their eyes glowing in the night. I knew then that I was in trouble, that I had run out of time. And so, with a sense of dread and determination, I prepared to face whatever was coming for me. I stood up slowly, my eyes locked on the three figures outside. They were humanoid in shape, but there was something wrong about them, something that made my skin crawl. As they stepped closer, I could see that their eyes were black, completely devoid of any light or emotion. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. But they didn't answer. Instead, they just continued to advance, their footsteps echoing through the warehouse. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nowhere to run. I was trapped, surrounded on all sides. And then, without warning, they lunged at me, their hands reaching out to grab me. I tried to fight back, but they were too strong, overpowering me with ease. They held me down, their cold, lifeless eyes boring into mine. And then, just as suddenly as they had attacked, they released me and stepped back, their eyes still fixed on me. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to catch my breath. But again, they didn't answer. Instead, they just stood there, silent and unmoving. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, disappearing into the night as if they had never been there. I was left alone, my heart pounding in my chest and my mind racing with questions and fears. Who were they? What did they want from me? I didn't know the answers, but I knew that I had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of whoever was chasing me. And so, I continued to wander the city, never staying in one place for too long. I was constantly on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, but I never saw anyone following me. But then, one night, as I was walking down an empty street, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the distance, was a figure, silhouetted against the night sky. And as I watched, it stepped closer, revealing itself to be a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes. I knew then that I was in trouble, that I had run out of time. And so, with a sense of dread and determination, I prepared to face whatever was coming for me. The figure approached me slowly, its eyes fixed on me. As it came closer, I could see that its features were twisted and grotesque, like something out of a nightmare. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, unable to escape. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. But I knew that it wouldn't be the last time I saw it. I knew that it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. And so, I continued to wander the city, always looking over my shoulder, always on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I was being hunted. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. And still, I wandered, always searching for some kind of refuge, some kind of sanctuary. But no matter where I went, the darkness followed me. It was like a living, breathing thing, always lurking just out of sight. And then, one night, as I was huddled in an abandoned building, trying to stay warm, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a scratching sound, coming from the wall next to me. And as I listened, I could hear something moving, something crawling through the darkness. I knew then that I was no longer alone, that something had found me. And so, with a sense of dread and determination, I prepared to face whatever was coming for me. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear. And then, suddenly, the wall began to crumble, revealing a small opening. I peered inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, inside the wall, was a small, narrow tunnel. It was barely big enough for a person to crawl through, and it led deeper into the darkness. I knew then that I had no choice but to follow it, that I had to face whatever was waiting for me on the other side. And so, with a sense of dread and determination, I crawled into the tunnel, feeling the rough stone scraping against my skin. The tunnel was long and winding, twisting and turning through the darkness. I could hear strange sounds echoing through the walls, like whispers on the wind. And then, finally, I emerged into a small, cramped room. It was dimly lit, and I could see shapes moving in the shadows. I stepped forward slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I approached, the shapes resolved themselves into figures. They were people, or at least, they had once been people. But now, they were something else entirely. Their skin was pale and waxy, and their eyes were black and empty. I tried to back away, but they surrounded me, closing in on all sides. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they attacked. I fought back, swinging wildly, trying to keep them at bay. But there were too many of them, overpowering me with ease. And then, just when I thought all was lost, I heard a voice. "Come on, hurry." It was a woman's voice, and it came from the darkness beyond the room. Without thinking, I ran towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman was waiting for me, her hand outstretched. I took it gratefully, and she pulled me towards a small opening in the wall. "Come on, we don't have much time," she said urgently. I followed her through the opening, crawling on my hands and knees, until we emerged into a small, cramped space. It was a hidden room, hidden away from the rest of the world. And as I looked around, I could see that it was filled with supplies, enough to last for months. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "My name is Emily," she said, smiling faintly. "And I'm here to help you." Emily led me to a small cot in the corner of the room, and I collapsed onto it, exhausted and shaking. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to answer. "There's something evil in this building," she finally said. "Something that's been here for a very long time." She paused, looking at me with a grave expression. "And it wants you." I shivered, feeling a cold sweat break out on my skin. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "But I do know that it won't stop until it gets what it wants." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. And then, suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door. Emily sprang to her feet, her expression one of fear and determination. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Now." She led me through a series of winding passageways, always staying one step ahead of whatever was pursuing us. We moved through the darkness, our breaths coming in short, ragged gasps, until we finally emerged into a large room. And there, waiting for us, was the source of all our fear. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its skin was black as coal, and its eyes glowed with a sickly green light. It towered over us, its claws extended, ready to strike. But Emily was unafraid. She stepped forward, holding out a small vial of liquid. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice steady. "Or else." The creature hesitated, its eyes narrowing. And then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. Emily dodged the attack with ease, and then, with a fluid motion, she threw the vial at the creature. It shattered against its skin, and the creature let out a piercing scream. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving behind only a cloud of black smoke. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, and then Emily turned to me. "We have to leave," she said urgently. "Now." And so we fled, running through the dark passageways, our footsteps echoing off the walls. We emerged into the light of day, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But even as I did, I knew that I would never forget the horrors that lurked in the darkness of that building. Emily and I emerged from the abandoned building, our hearts pounding in our chests. We stumbled out into the bright light of day, blinking in the sudden brightness. I turned to Emily, who was panting heavily. "What was that thing?" I asked, still reeling from the shock of what we had just experienced. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's been here for a very long time." I looked around, taking in my surroundings. We were in a deserted part of town, with empty buildings on every side. "We have to get out of here," I said, feeling a sudden sense of urgency. "We can't stay in this town any longer." Emily nodded, her expression serious. "I agree," she said. "But we have to be careful. That thing could be anywhere." We made our way through the deserted streets, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main roads. Every sound made us jump, and I felt as though I was being watched at every turn. We walked for what felt like hours, until finally we arrived at the outskirts of the town. And there, waiting for us, was a car. "Get in," Emily said, motioning for me to follow her. I climbed into the passenger seat, and Emily revved the engine, the car screeching away into the distance. As we drove, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. We were finally free, out of that cursed town and away from the horrors that lurked within. But even as I looked out the window, watching the world go by, I knew that the memory of that creature would haunt me for the rest of my days.